Hello, I'm Sky Matsuhashi, founder of SmartPokerStudy.com, the place for poker players who are always striving to be better today than they were yesterday. Poker people, if you enjoy breaking the rules like I do, make sure you catch episode 83, a Q&A, where I told you 5 poker, quote-unquote, rules worth breaking today. Hey, poker people, thanks for helping the show grow through all that you do, like, telling your friends, subscribing and downloading episodes in iTunes or Stitcher, Google Play, hitting up the show notes, and for posting stuff in the Facebook group. I really appreciate it, everybody. But whatever it is that you're doing to help me grow, please keep it up, and that's awesome on ya. Man, I am super pumped. It's finally the weekend. It's been a hot summer, so we're going to spend as much time as we can indoors, except for, early morning Pokemon hunting with the boys, before 9 a.m. But it is the weekend, so we're taking the family to see the new Ghostbusters today, and I'm really looking forward to it. Afterwards, of course, we'll hit our favorite pizza joint, Blast Pizza, for what I call a healthy lunch. I love pizza, my favorite food, and for me, it's more healthy than it is for them because they get regular crust. I always go with that gluten-free pizza crust, I'm not allergic or anything. I just really try to stay away from the flour products. I don't eat pastas or breads or sandwiches, any of that stuff. Unless it's like gluten-free bread, gluten-free pasta, or my burgers. We're probably going to have burgers for dinner tonight, and, it's going to be lettuce-wrapped burgers, that kind of stuff. Because those flour products, they go straight to my hips, baby, and I don't need that. So it's mostly just protein, and veggies for this guy. And beyond the family outing, I am totally looking forward to finishing season 5 of The Wire. If you guys have seen it, you know what I'm talking about. It's a great show. Bodhi just died, and I was just blown away. I didn't think Bodhi would die. I figured in the end he would become a kingpin, But whatever, it's really good stuff, and I'm looking forward to it. Mick Nolte got back on the sauce again, and that's terrible. So I'm hoping he straightens everything out there. So if you haven't seen The Wire, maybe those are some spoilers for you. But if you haven't seen it, that's season 5. You got to get through 1 through 4 first, and you'll forget everything I just said. But anyway, before I get to any of that stuff, before Ghostbusters, before the pizza, before The Wire, we've got to do some Q&A action. And today I am featuring 3 questions from some gnarly poker peeps. So let's get the show on the road. Visit today's show at www.smartpokerstudy.com/pod84 for links to everything that I discussed today and to join that weekly boost for exclusive poker strategy delivered directly to your inbox. Alrighty, so today's first question comes to us from Mike Tappert. Good afternoon, Sky. I am hosting a bounty tournament this weekend. I've never actually played in one, but have been thinking about the strategic implications of the bounty in relation to overall tournament, quote-unquote, equity, and ICM considerations. Do you have any thoughts on knockout bounty tournaments and how to adjust? Thanks. Alrighty, well, thank you very much for that question, Mike, and I really do. I kind of hesitate to answer a question like this on the podcast because the truth is I don't play many bounty tournaments, but even though I hesitate to answer it, I'm pushing forward and I will answer it to the best of my ability. So when I play bounty tournaments, I try not to let the bounty affect my play too much. I try to play like it's a normal tournament because the prize money up top it's normally more valuable than the bounties you could collect along the way. There are some crazy tournaments where the bounty is actually half of everybody's buy-in. And I've never played those. I've just heard about them. That might really change things. I normally play tournaments or bounty tournaments where the bounty is like 10% or like 20% of the buy-in. It's not that big of a deal, But for bounty tournaments, there are some considerations you have to take into account just because of the format and the way your opponents will approach it. That's one of the big things here. So one of the considerations, it's fine on borderline decisions to let the bounty sway you to one side. So let's say you've got the flop flush draw and your opponent shoves his stack in. Maybe the break-even math makes your call neutral or slightly negative EV. Like maybe your odds of hitting the flush, of course, are 36%. 9 outs times 4, 36%. But the pot odds offered are maybe 36% or slightly less. Well, that bounty that's part of the bounty equation there, it just sweetens the deal to now make it a positive EV call. Because your win nets you more than just the chips in the pot. You're also making a little dough on the side, So that's one of the considerations. Another consideration is that there are spots where I will try to pre-isolate a short stack player who is still to act. So, for example, maybe I'm under the gun. Or let's take something even better. There's been a couple folds. I'm in the cutoff, and there's a short stack in the big blind. Maybe he has 8 BBs, What can happen, or what I can do to try to pre-isolate this guy is I'll just open to 3 BBs, and maybe it folds around to him, or maybe somebody calls, and then he decides to shove with his short stack. I don't know that he's going to, but he's only got 8 BBs, 1 BB in the pot already. There's a good chance if he has anything decent, any decent ace, a king, any pocket pair, of course, and some suited connectors and broadways, he's gonna shove. So the fact that I opened and he committed his full 8 big blind stack, anybody that wants to call after he gets in, they have to worry about me 4-betting even more when the action comes around back to me, So this, in effect, it isolates him and I in this pot, and it gives me the chance to knock him out. But I will only do this if my stack is big enough so that taking the 8 BB hit, if should he win the hand with my open and then calling his 3-bet, should I have to take that 8 big blind hit, it doesn't cripple my chances in the tournament. That's when I'll make this kind of play. But if I've only got 16 big blinds, I probably won't try to isolate that guy with anything less than a value hand. And the last consideration I want to talk about, and it's probably the biggest consideration for bounty tournaments, it's the willingness of your loose passive opponents to call all-ins, and they call them very light. If you've got someone like that on your left, and you shove as a shorter stack, just assume that they'll be calling you. If you know that the guy's a station and he wants to collect bounties, maybe you've seen him call with like Queen Jack suited or Ace 4 offsuit before, maybe a big bet. You know this guy's going to call your shove with a pretty wide range. And I've seen guys call 15 big blind shoves with hands, just like I said, suited connectors, gappers, weak broadways, and weak aces because they want the bounty. So it's great that they're willing to call you with so many weaker holdings, but that means you have less fold equity. So what I'm saying is don't shove too wide. If he's willing to call every single ace, every king, and maybe even every queen, you'll probably want to avoid shoving those mid-range suited connectors like a Jack 10 or an 8-9, or even, a 6-8 suited, stuff like that, and stay away from those Jack and 10 high hands as well. If he's calling with any queen or better, then you're risking being dominated in such a way that it doesn't make it worth shoving that shorter stack, So for you, Mike, I hope your bounty tournament went really well. You sent me this email a while ago, so I assume you already had that tournament. And if you do want more bounty tournament strategy, I'm sure you could find a ton of it online. So thanks for that question, Mike, and do some Googling. Alrighty, question 2 today comes to us from Ed Culwell. He says, "Hi, Sky. Any thoughts on how far to take a C-bet? When I open a pot, I usually C-bet even if I miss the flop. If I get called, I will barrel the turn, and if called again, do I barrel the river or shut down by checking and folding if villain bets?" Ed, from Ed. Alrighty, well, thank you so much for the question and email, Ed. And, there is no hard and fast rule here regarding barreling opponents off of hands. So, your questions here, should I shut down by checking and folding? I can't say yes or no exactly, but there are 5 things that you need to consider. These are the things that I always consider when I determine how likely my barreling will get an opponent off their hand. Barrel bluffing. Value considerations. A lot of these considerations, if you're going for value, are kind of the same. You just have to look at them from the other way. For value, you want him to call or raise you. But now you're asking about bluffing right here. So if you're asking about bluffing, we need to look at these considerations with bluffing in mind. So consideration number 1 is your position. And of course, C-bet bluffing out of position is super difficult. We all know that. You might be better off check-raise bluffing instead of donk bluffing. And being in position, of course, gives you a better shot at pushing opponents off of hands because you get to act after they show weakness, as well as you being in position means that there's potential for you to bet and make things difficult for them on later streets. So in position just makes your bluffs more likely to succeed. The second consideration is just your opponent, your exact opponent that you're playing in this hand. And it's very difficult to bluff a calling station off of their hand. If the guy calls down with bottom pair, second pair, a third pocket pair, ace high, whatever it might be, then don't even try for a bluff. Just wait for a value hand and go for value against the guy instead. Let him pay you off. If you know he's nitty and he only continues with good hands, then bluffs are more likely to succeed. So the third consideration is your opponent's stats versus c-bets. Now, of course, if you're playing online and using a HUD, you should have plenty of stats on the guy, assuming you've played a few hands on him. So if you are playing online, it is really great to use those stats to see what street he gets honest on. You just need to make sure you've got the chips to barrel him off on that street. So some guys, maybe they're super flop honest. They fold to c-bets like 65% or more, or 70% or more. Then fire that c-bet bluff on every single flop, no matter what. And if he calls every flop but folds turns, so you'll see guys like this, their fold to flop c-bet is 30%, but their fold to turn c-bet is like 60 or 70%. Then make sure you've got the chips to barrel him off on the turn with the threat of more aggression on the river. If you only have enough chips to take you a bet through the turn and then you're all in, well, then there's no threat of an implied river bet, And so I just talked about playing online poker with some stats. If you're playing live poker, you need to take mental notes or use Evernote or, a pad and paper, whatever you want to do, to track how your opponents respond to c-bets on the various streets. And you can create your own categorization or a station meter to gauge how stationary the opponent is and to record which streets they get honest on. Give some thought into this, especially if you're a live player, on how you can categorize people on their stationiness after the flop. All right, the fourth consideration is stack sizes, and I kind of just mentioned it in the previous, about stats and c-bets. But in regards to stack sizes, you need to make sure you've got the chips to bluff with and to imply threats on later streets. If your opponent is maybe he already put in 33% of his stack preflop, then he's got only a pot-sized bet left behind when the flop hits. And of course, this is a stack to pot ratio or SPR of only 1. And so when this happens, when he's only got a pot-sized bet left in his stack, it's really hard to bluff someone when, guys like this often feel pot committed to this point. The pot is $60. I only have $60 in my stack. How am I going to fold to anything less than a complete whiff? That's how a lot of guys think. And so the bigger the effective stacks, the more likely your bluffs will succeed. So if the pot is $60, but he has $1,000 behind, there's so much more at risk right there. It's easier to bluff a guy off of a hand when he's got the bigger stack. Okay, and the fifth consideration is, of course, and this is probably the most important consideration, besides the player type that you're up against, is the board and his likely range. So, let's say you open and your opponent calls. If you look at his stats, or if you know him from playing live poker with him, you know that he often calls lots of broadways and pocket pairs. And if this is the case, if we know this, we might not want to barrel on Broadway heavy boards like Queen Jack Deuce, as he likely flopped weak pairs, maybe even two pair, or some kind of straight draw that he just won't fold. On a Queen Jack Deuce, if a guy's often calling King 10, King Jack, King Queen, Queen 10, all that kind of stuff, he won't give up so easily on the Queen Jack Deuce board. And also, you also might not want to barrel boards with lots of medium cards. We said he calls with broadways and pocket pairs. So if he's calling with a ton of pocket pairs, that's all the way from deuces up through maybe nines or tens, So you don't want to barrel. You can throw out the initial c-bet, but maybe not barrel boards like 8-7-5 or 4-6-8. If he has pocket sevens on an 8-7-5, he has trips, or on a 4-6-8, he's got the second pair, but he also has the gut shot draw, So he could have easily flopped sets or another draw or an overpair that he won't give up on these kinds of boards. So the bottom line is, the more likely his range hit the board, and by hit it, I'm talking about draws or pairs, just something worth continuing. So the more likely he hit the board, the less likely you'll blow him off of his hand. So make sure that you review all your double barrel and triple barrel opportunities. And, when you actually do the double barrels and triple barrels, make sure you review all of those hands. to see if your decisions were well advised or if you missed any important clues that should have told you not to do the barreling, Well, thank you very much for that question, Ed. I hope that helps. So it's time for a Patreon plug. If you support me on Patreon, you can get some exclusive poker strategy content that I won't deliver anywhere else. There are different levels of support, and with each level comes different rewards. You can get over-the-top podcast shout-outs, early release podcasts, extra patron-only podcasts and videos, copies of my future ebooks, and more just for supporting me with a small monthly contribution. There are also some crazy goals that I've set, so please help me hit these goals and you'll hear more strategy content from me in the future. So to learn more or to support me, please visit patreon.com/smartpokerstudy. And this past week, Jeremy Johnston decided to put part of his poker bankroll every single month to great use by supporting me on Patreon. Now, Jeremy, or JJ as I call him, he enjoys the good life. You should see his Facebook page. It's chock full of lobster dishes and intricate chicken avocado creations. He knows what he likes and he isn't afraid to go out and get it and gobble it up. This guy knows the good life and he's living it, obviously. He's the kind of guy I want to be when I grow up. Feeding his kids well and showing them what it is to be a real man. JJ, thank you so much, and your support is much appreciated. Alrighty, on to today's final question, and it's from Tim. He says, "Hello, Sky. I've been trying to play in a lot of small stakes daily no-limit hold'em tournaments at my local casino. Low buy-ins with lots of the same faces playing. Last night, I felt like I was playing well until one hand, and it got into my head afterwards. I kept dwelling on it and thinking about my table image and went all in with a weak hand and busted 19th out of 50. So here's the hand that set me off. I was in late position. Blinds were 75-150. Four limpers ahead of me. I raised to 450 with queen-queen. Big blind called, and one other person called. I flopped a set. I bet large, 2,000 chips, because there were two clubs on the flop. The big blind hesitated but called. The other guy folded. The turn was a club. The big blind bet 4,000 chips. I started thinking he caught the flush, and I did end up folding. That might have been a mistake, but for sure my mistake was showing my fold. I thought it was showing off a big fold to save face and ego or something. The whole table started saying, 'How could you fold that with the river still to come?' Even the dealer said he would have played that. It got in my head, and it was all downhill from there. I felt embarrassed. What do you think, Tim?" Alrighty, Tim. Well, that's a great question. And before I get to the whole embarrass and showing hands part, first off, I think you've got to raise more than just 3 big blinds over 4 limpers pre-flop. When you have a hand like queen-queen, you really want to limit the field. And I think you could normally expect to get all the limpers as well as the big blinds to call when you make it just 3 big blinds, because that pot is so big. They really have odds to call just about anything at that point. So mathematically, those limpers, those 4 guys that limped pre, only one of them called. All 3 of them really should have called, I think. They showed passivity pre-flop by limping. They should continue that passivity by just calling your raise, But flopping that set was just what you needed, of course. I like the size of your roughly pot-sized bet of 2,000 chips with the nuts at the time. You had top set right there. But you need to ask yourself what you think the caller would have called you with. If you put him on calling only flush draws, like the only thing that he would call and then bet out is a flush draw, then sure, the fold on the turn 3 flush is just fine. But of course, he's calling you with more than just the flush draws. He could have been calling with a top pair hand, 2-pair hand, top pair with the ace of clubs, with a backdoor nut flush draw. He could have even had an underset and was trying to slow play you, or some other kind of draw, or even an overcard like ace jack. So no pair, but just the jack of clubs, or maybe not jack of clubs, I'm sorry, the ace jack with the ace of clubs. So his turn donk bet of about 2/3 pot could be for value with a flush, or it could have been a worse hand than yours, like I just mentioned, the top pair, the 2-pair, or it could have possibly been a bluff, because players like to donk lead like this on scary cards to blow you off of your hand. He could have seen your largish flop bet on that kind of wet board, the 2-club board. He could have seen it as a strong hand right now that was scared of the board. So when the flush completed, he rightly figured that you would be scared of that flush card. I would have liked to call from you on the turn and then reassessed on the river. I don't know what your starting stack was at the beginning of the hand, and your call would have committed a total of 6,500 chips to the pot, counting your pre-flop, your flop, and the turn call. So if you still had maybe 20 big blinds behind, which is just 3,000 chips, if you had just 3,000 chips behind, then you could have made the call knowing that you could fold the river, still having a decent amount of play left in the tournament. And regarding showing your hand later, I have to say that that is something that you really should have never done. And obviously you learned your lesson. You know that you shouldn't from your email. And don't let the table know that you're capable of folding such a strong hand like this, you know. I mean, you folded top set on a scare card turn. I mean, these guys are going to use that against you and bluff you off or try to bluff you so often now. You could turn that into some kind of advantage and then slow play and then act scared when you turn the nuts or river the nuts or something. But for the most part, you're just going to embolden these guys to play very aggressive against you. So you did say that you were embarrassed afterwards. So next time, avoid this embarrassment by just never showing your hand at all. And one thing that this whole email and the situation tells me is that you might be the kind of player that sees quote-unquote monsters under the bed. I imagine you often think very negatively every time a scare card comes off, like the 3 flush on the turn, maybe the board pairs, an overcard, or a straight draw completes, something like that. I used to be like this quite a bit, so I understand where you're coming from, and I know that it often stems from a fear of losing or from wanting to win super badly. You just want that money, and I fight this mentality every single session by trying to play with a mindset of trying to make the best decisions possible right now, and the money be damned. I'm looking at basically every situation, every hand that I'm in, I'm playing it with intent to make the best decisions possible in that single hand and not letting any outside influences or outside factors influence me. So thank you so much for that question, and good luck at the tables, Tim. And thank you so much for listening today. And thanks again to Mike, Ed, and Tim for those questions featured. I hope my answers boost your poker skills. If you're not already there, head over to the show notes page for everything discussed today at smartpokerstudy.com/pod84. And I love feedback as well as more questions. Send me those strategy questions and the feedback, please. You can do it through the show notes or through email to sky@smartpokerstudy.com. You can send me a tweet at smartpokerstudy or post it in the Facebook group. And if you're not a member, go to the Facebook group and ask to join right there. It's smartpokerstudy.com/discuss. It'll take you directly to that Facebook page. Alrighty, poker people, I'll be back in 1 week's time with another Q&A. Of course, word of mouth, like I mentioned before, is the best advertising, and I thank you so much for sharing it with other poker people. And by it, I'm talking about this show. It only grows with your help, so share it with people who will get value from it, just like you do. And don't forget to visit www.patreon.com/smartpokerstudy to support the show and to collect some nice monthly rewards. Until next time, study smart, play much, and make your next session the best one yet.